FPA 1, Tape 4, Side A, talking about a very interesting subject of minister and his ethics, his conduct, how he treats his fellow minister, how he treats his fellow minister's congregation, and just in general his behavior with others. Two primary reasons that a preacher loves to receive transfers from another man's church. One of those is money. We can talk about all kind of spiritual reasons. You know, we can justify our behavior by saying that, well, we offer that person more spiritual growth potential. A lot of different reasons we can use, but just to cut away all the fog and smoke around what's going on, there's two reasons, usually. Most usually there's two reasons. Number one is money. A couple who make combined $30,000 a year will pay $3,000 tithes and up to as much as $1,500 in donations to various programs of the church, foreign home missions, Sunday school, youth, building fund, general offerings. So we're talking $4,500 a year over a 10-year period. That couple will contribute $45,000 to that church. And if you can pick up three of those couples, you have gained about $135,000 through your treasury over a 10-year period. That's considerable. The tithing alone of $30,000 for one couple or $90,000 for three couples. Just the growth of three couples, and this level of income will add a $90,000 income to the church over a 10-year period. $9,000 a year, that's not bad. Oh, if you could get 10 or 15 couples. Well, it doesn't take long until you can see that money plays a strong consideration. Now, of course, we never state that up front. I know that if you're going to take members from somebody's church, why, you're not going to just say, well, I'm after their money. You're going to say, well, you know, they have more growth opportunity in our church, and they're more comfortable with the people in our congregation. But say what you want to, the love of money is the root of all evil, and money plays the strong consideration in our taking in members from another church. Second of all is pride. And there is a very strong motivation to the pride of life. There's ego that we preachers have, and we must cater to that ego trip that we need to travel on occasionally. And so it is if we can pick up a family with 4 children, that's 6 in our Sunday school, and then they have relatives in that church, and so we'll have an inside track to the membership of the neighboring church. And so if they will come into our church, we pick them up. They also are very talented musicians and singers and Sunday school teachers and workers. So we have the potential of growth added to immensely by the moving in of this family, and so we readily receive them. It gives us bragging rights of our growth for the last year. Yes, we've gone from 50 to 56 just the last few days. And we expect a larger growth because we know that there are more disgruntled people and those that live on the periphery of the church body. And we know that if we can make these people so excited about our church, they're going to tell others. And our motives are wrong, and they're obviously wrong. And we kind of justify our motives by a smoke screen. And we give all kind of reasons and logic. But let's deal with ethics. Let's deal with principle. We have a community with so many unsaved that need God. And the call of the ministry is not only to assimilate a large congregation, but to minister to the needy and the lost. The obligation to minister to the unsaved is the foremost obligation of any preacher in his congregation. And with every added family you get, there is the benefits of added income and boasting rights. But there's an added responsibility of growth. I understand that in the growth pattern of any church that there can't be a 200 change from growth to 200. At 200, there will need to be a complete overhauling of the structure from the top down of delegated authority and officers and areas of responsibility. And then again, at around 400, it's a total different organizational structure from 200. And so it's going to mandate that the pastor restructure, and people will be shuffled around, and there's going to be awkward situations, and there's property to buy and classes to be added, etc., and on the list goes. So just simply growth is not a solution in itself. I've heard it said, and I think this is an overstatement of the fact, maybe an oversimplification, but the more people you have, the more problems you have. And to a degree that's true, but I wouldn't want to compare every person with a problem. All people are not problems. Now, they all have struggles, but they contribute immensely to the work of God, and there's nothing wrong with having a church that grows 2, 4, 6, 800. The size is not really the basic importance. The foundation of that church is what's really important. If I must lose the relationship, the friendship, the fellowship of all the pastors within the 100-mile radius of my church, for me to experience the growth that I desire to have, then I had rather, if that's the only two choices, I'd rather have far less growth and the good relationship with my fellow minister than to have phenomenal growth and then have lost all the respect of the neighboring ministers, because a bishop must have a good report from without. And even though we know that Jesus was concerned with the ministry that he came to minister, and even at age 12 he was prepared to go into the synagogue and teach, there was a scripture, that says that he continued in favor of both God and man. And we can expect to please people sometimes. And we can fall back on that scripture, when every man speaks well of you, you need to beware. But we're not talking about every man, every ungodly heathen, but there are those in our fellowship. There are those of like precious faith that we should be able to work with hand in hand. When you find yourself in conflict with 2 or 3 of the ministers of like precious faith, it's time that you backed off and looked at yourself critically and examined, what am I doing wrong? What's so offensive about me? What have I done that upsets others? Now, there is a problem in the examination, because there are times when people will be unhappy with you because they have a spirit of jealousy. And if you excel and your church grows by virtue of your strong leadership and your able administration and your effective, powerful preaching and a spirit of compassion that's demonstrated from you and your wife to the congregation, and the congregation falls in love with you and falls in love with God, and they really do excessive visitation, and they're faithful in their prayer, then your church will grow compared to someone who is either 1, not as able, or 2, not as committed. And so then it's easy for those with less apparent success to become jealous. Jealousy is one of the emotions that causes so many problems among the ministry. Jealousy is a difficult subject to talk about because it's a spirit. And quite often the development of a spirit of jealousy is brought about by real situations. Sometimes it would almost seem from a human or a logical viewpoint that jealousy is justified, because 2 people put out the same amount of effort. One is blessed immensely more than another. But jealousy is wrong. And it has to start with our heart, our motives. If the work of God is our heartbeat, then if our brother is blessed, then we rejoice and we don't become disturbed. If our brother manifests an arrogant or a haughty spirit, we don't let that bother us, because we have a confidence that God will reward us according to our deeds, and he will reward our brother according to his deeds. And many of the times that we see a scenario develop, and based on what we see and what we feel that we know, we come to a judgment that's maybe incorrect. We feel that motives are wrong or different than projected, and we feel like that there's a degree of unfairness. That's not always true, but whether it be or not, we have to keep a right spirit. If God has ordained that he wants me to work in a field that's not as large as the field you labor in, that's God's wisdom and knowledge and his prerogative.
And there will be some who will pastor small congregations and will not win national plaques and recognition. But somebody's got to pastor those churches, and perhaps there's too much emphasis put on bigness and what the world would call success. So you have to watch for the pit of jealousy. It's there. And if you're going to be a successful, and you're going to be an effective, and you're going to be a mover, then you just have to accept the fact that there will be some people who will be jealous of you. And if you will be loving and kind and patient enough to look at all the blessings you have received, maybe you can understand the source of some of that jealousy. And maybe a more giving spirit on your part would alleviate some of that pressure on them. Maybe a little bit of willing sacrifice. Perhaps your income is such that you don't have to make some sacrifice, but how about a willing sacrifice? A giving of some things of yours that would change the opinion of those around you and show them love. Heap love and compassion on them. Jealousy is something that we have to deal with all the days of our ministry, either on the one side or the other. In good relations with our fellow ministers, it's so important to continuously remember that they're all human beings. They weep, they cry, they hurt, they get sick, they're frustrated. None of us attain all of our goals. We're all disappointed on a regular basis. I think that perhaps one of the shocks in my life is the loneliness that preachers endure. We live in a very secluded world. We cannot relate to our congregation the way we ought to. We can't let our hair down and laugh and just be a common person in front of them, lest we would perhaps lose some of the respect. So we need other ministers that we associate with and that we fellowship with, socialize, and that we can just be ourselves and relax and enjoy an evening separate and apart from our ministerial obligations and duties. I was in the Deep South and had a day that my schedule was not full, and I was between two services and just kind of wanted to talk to someone. My wife wasn't there. So there was a friend, that acquaintance at least, that pastored in the area, and I got on the phone and called him and just said, if you got a few minutes, maybe we can go and eat lunch together and spend a few minutes together. Much to my surprise, he said, sure, come right on over. Man, I'm so glad you called. I went over and he proceeded to give me a good grand tour of his beautiful building, and he showed me through his office, and he showed me some things that he had acquired recently, and then he showed me some projected improvements to his building. And then finally we got loose and we went and ate, and after eating there was a couple of places that he wanted to stop, a couple of shops, and he, Brother Stanford, what's your opinion of this amplifier? And then we went a couple more places, and then he wanted to show me his city and some of the high points of his city. And finally, after about 4 or 5 hours, we went back to the church, and he apologized for monopolizing my time. And then he made this statement. He said, I so seldom have anyone who bothers to come by to see me. And when he said that, I detected a loneliness. And that's the world we live in. There's 5 billion of us human beings on this little earth. And sometimes our cities will number in the millions of population. But we live in a cocoon. Our car windows are rolled up when we drive. Either we have the heater or the air conditioner on. Our homes are sealed. Many of us do not know the neighbors' names. We don't know anything about them. And we live in a cocoon. We go into a store. There's a clerk that's got this little light that reads the price, and it punches into the cash register, and in just a very few seconds you can run through 30 items on the cash register, and they turn around and say $49.76, and you give it to them, and there's someone behind you that's bumping you with their cart. Hurry up, we've got our items to check out. And we live in that kind of a world. And so we just take some things for granted. That's not true. Our neighbor is lonely. Our neighbor, our fellow minister, has frustrating moments. A telephone call, a letter, a visit, an invitation out for dinner. Some of those things can add immensely to the loneliness. Unpleasant experience that I had was the time that one of my fellow ministers was going through a very personal
struggle, a time of trauma in his life. Depression had set in, and he had talked with me, been in my home for about 3 days. We had spent time in prayer in the afternoon and in the evening, and at 2 in the morning and at 5 in the morning, he just knew that he could tap at the door and I'd be happy to pray with him, and we'd talked with him and we'd prayed with him, and we'd seen an improvement, and I was encouraged. At the conclusion of his visit in my home at my church, he went on to another place, and within a week's time I got a phone call that this very personal friend of mine, a great man of God, had somehow let fears and depression, frustration, anxiety, uncertainty prevail, and he had committed suicide. That's been a number of years now, but on regular occasion I remember this man, and I will always feel that there was something else I could have done for him. For him. When you are prepared to receive into your church a family that this man has wept over, has taught Bible studies, has prayed long hours, has visited in their home, has tolerated their dishonest commitments that they've promised to be in church, and they've failed again and again, but he's gone back. His wife has gone back. He sacrificed his spare time. He sacrificed time with his children. His church has paid a price, but finally they have prayed through, and now they have started paying tithes, and their children sing in the choir. He is starting to teach a home Bible study. Finally, there is production from this effort. But you're willing to take this person in without considering the heartbeat of your neighboring pastor, then there is a problem with you. I know you can justify their coming. You have so much more to offer these people. I hesitate to let you be around my children because I have 2 sons, and you may only have 3 daughters. And since you have no sons, you could justify the enticing my sons to be unfaithful to me. I'm not interested in being around a person like that. When you will take advantage of one of your neighboring preachers' situations, then I don't want you to ever preach in my pulpit, because my people may also learn to love and respect you. I teach my people respect for the ministry, all the ministry. And when you come here and you stand in my pulpit and you preach, this congregation will respect you. They will hold you in high esteem. And if you cannot be trusted with another, then I don't want to be trusted with you either. Now, let's talk about sheep stealing, proselytizing, the unethical soliciting of another person's members. I know that we realize that there's only 3 of those in the United States. It's just that I happen to be living close to one, and you happen to be living close to one. There's not a lot of them, but let's touch on the subject, because there are, a few, 2 or 3, maybe 4. Now, what do we do with the sheep stealer? Do we hang him at daybreak, or do we shoot him? Or what do we do? No, I'll tell you what we do. We leave him alone, because really what he does, we don't have to answer for anyway. And let's accept the fact. If they can entice someone from your church to go to theirs, then the shame is on this piece of meat that has been placed on the market, and they're willing to be bought for a price. And if those people are willing to be enticed like that, and they have not made a commitment to loyalty and faithfulness, then they're not going to be faithful and loyal in the new setting to the new pastor. And you must, at this time, guard against any wrong spirits on your part, for you can't change that neighbor. You don't have to answer for that neighbor's conduct, but you do have to answer for your behavior and your conduct, your attitude. You cannot let this affect you. You will find yourself becoming suspicious, cynical, critical, sarcastic. You will find yourself bitter. And when you fall into the pit of those evil spirits, they will consume you. They will destroy you physically. They will destroy you emotionally. They will destroy you spiritually. It's not worth it. There are too many unsaved. Maybe you have become a little careless in your soul winning. There's a little lethargy that's set in. And it's something like this that will provoke you to realize that you once again need to teach a few Bible studies, that you need to have a revival. You need to have an outreach. You need to preach on soul winning and the love of the lost to your congregation. And you can actually turn that thing and make it inspire you and you can be a bigger person because of it. If one leaves, another will show up. What goes around comes around. And if someone's unloyal, unfaithful, don't worry. In fact, pray for them, because when their day comes, they're going to hurt. And you can't rejoice over your brother's hurt and pain. Serve the Lord. He is the rewarder of those that diligently seek Him. He's the paymaster. He's the one that has promised to take care of us. And if you build a congregation of 10,000 on personality and organization, there's no benefit on that. Build on the work of the Lord. Build on the word of the Lord. Put people's confidence in Him, and you'll never, never be sorry. There are a few things that we can do. The brain can be represented by a lot of rows of little dots. Those dots represent memory cells. And when a person goes to learn something, whether it be to drive a car or to play a musical instrument or memorize a poem, anything they go to learn, they have the capability of those memory cells. And you go from one memory cell to the next. You know, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without. And you learn those, and each memory cell stores a certain amount of information. And as you go from memory cell to memory cell, you can retain and bring back those things you want to remember. So you can learn to do things by habit. Shifting the gears in a car is one. You can be talking, driving, and not even aware that you shift gears. Mash the clutch, release the clutch, accelerate the gas, etc. And you just do it subconsciously because you programmed it into your brain. And each time that you do something, as those electrical impulses go from memory cell to memory cell, it leaves a little trail. And the more times you do that, the stronger the trail is, until after a while, those memory cells are actually linked together with a trail that becomes a rut. And your thought pattern will hit the first memory cell. It will automatically go to the second, the third, the fourth, and you'll do it a certain way. That's the reason that addiction is so difficult, not only physical addiction, but emotional addiction. And some folks become addicted to things, and it's emotional as much as their brain you do one thing, you just automatically do another. A person finishes eating, they reach in their pocket, they pull out a pack of cigarettes, they take out a cigarette, they lean back in their chair, they light up that cigarette, they say, and they've programmed it into their brain that's joy, that's exciting, that's interesting. The truth of the matter is that you can then break those habits. But on the positive side, for we that want to do some things, we can program into our brain how we're going to treat our fellow preacher. Number one, I never give my address to another man's member. I never. Someone comes up, I can be 2,000 miles from home, they come up and say, I have a friend living in your city. Give me your address and I'll send you the information so that you can go and visit these people. They're interested. I make it a point, when I go into another man's church, I don't take my business cards with me. I leave them in my room. I leave them in my briefcase. I do not even care. When I look at this person and smile real sweetly, and I say, I didn't bring my address with me. Listen, your pastor has it, and just talk with him when you get all the information together. If I give you my address, now you may lose it before you find the other information anyway. So just see your pastor. He's got all the information. And that way they don't feel like the pastor and I are in some kind of conflict, and that there's a problem, and that they've done something unethical or improper, because basically they haven't. It's just that I had the opportunity to do something unethical. I could have given them my address, been in contact with them, and been very unfair to their pastor. Number two, I never take money from another man's church member. I've had an opportunity to preach in a number of churches, and I'll preach in a church and I'll talk about the immense cost of living in the city of Boston. This northeast corridor is expensive, and the struggles that we've been through. And somewhere in the course of that message, someone's heart will be touched, and after service, they'll come around and they'll have money or a check in their hand, and they'll, with tears in their eyes. I mean, these people are beautiful Christians. They have all the right motives, and they say, I want to give you this. And now it's up to me. It's not up to their pastor to come around and slap their hands and kick me out. It's up to me. The burden of responsibility is mine. How I handle this is all important. I'm dealing with a very delicate situation. These are precious people with right motives, and what they're wanting to do is honorable. At the same time, they have not chosen the correct vehicle. And so I look at them and smile, and I say, well, I'd rather you give it to your pastor, and then he can have a record of it, and he can take care of it.
please do that, and then let him be a part of this, and he would enjoy that. And they look at me and they, oh, you know, it's so innocent. Oh, yeah, I didn't think of that. Yes, I will. I'll do that. And I have even had people go to shake my hand, and there would be money in their hand as soon as I would feel the paper in my hand. I didn't have to stop and say, now, am I a Christian? Do I have a conviction? Have I made a commitment? Should I take this money? Maybe I ought to look at the check, see how much it's worth first before I turn it down. No, I have programmed into my mind there are some things that I have chosen that I will do. I do not give my name. I do not take other names and addresses. I do not take money from members of another church. I will not counsel members from another church. There may be problems that I could help with, but I will not counsel. And usually I'm not as wise as I'd like to believe. There are mitigating circumstances. There are situations that pastor has knowledge of that he can counsel and advise far better than I can. He knows everyone involved. And so I just don't counsel people from another congregation. I let a visitor to my church, who is a member of a neighboring church, I let them know that they're a visitor. I welcome them as a visitor only. In fact, I have it set up so someone of my church welcomes all of my visitors by name. Therefore, everyone gets the exact same treatment. We don't have them stand and do a 20-minute introduction of these phenomenal soul winners, these super spiritual people that have held my neighbor's church together for him in his weaknesses and deficiencies. Here is the backbone of that church, and these are the greatest people in all the world, and go on and just build them up. And they respond by thinking, this is where I want to go, where someone will appreciate me. And it's up to me to do what's right and to let them know that they're visitors and they're here for this night, and we expect them to be back home faithful. No special attention. I don't take them out to eat after the meal, after the service. I don't invite them to my home, and we just give them a certain amount of attention. Then I do not necessarily follow this with a phone call to the neighboring pastor, because quite often those phone calls are dripping with sarcasm. Hey, someone from your church was at our church tonight. Now, I want you to know that I respect you, and I'm going to treat your pastoring of them with the proper etiquette, and et cetera, et cetera. Then save all that. Just do it. Then I won't have any problem. And there won't be any cause for suspicion or fear. And so if I will treat your people correct, then you won't have to worry, and I'm not going to call you and rub it in, because all of us have people who become disgruntled from time to time. All of us do. And just because it's your turn now to have a little problem doesn't mean that my turn is not just around the corner. What goes around comes around. This side of the tape is complete. Please turn it over. Thank you. FPA 1, tape 4, side B. We're talking about emceeing church service. When a person takes the pulpit. FPA 1, tape 4, side B. We're talking about ethics. My, how important it is. I don't believe we can over-exaggerate the importance of ethics. Let's talk about friendship with our neighboring pastors. There should be some basis of respect and cordiality. I also think it's important that we be so honest as to recognize there are different personalities. That doesn't mean one is more or less Christian than another, but there are some people I found I enjoy being around more than others. And if I select one or two friends that I can socialize with the limited time that I have, I enjoy being with them. There are other men who may actually pastor a church closer to me that I hardly ever socialize with. There's a different composition of their personalities, him and his wives, his family situation, maybe age difference and different background, and they would be more comfortable with other people. Not that we are enemies, but we don't have to be socially close to everyone who believes the same doctrine. In fact, in the local church situation, I find that there are sometimes families who seem to, well, the old term used to be, you had cliques in your church, and we've preached against that so strong. But I found that the people of certain personalities enjoy being with people of the same personalities. In the area of age and activities. Someone who gives all of their attention to music would not enjoy spending all their time with someone who does mostly fishing and hunting. And there's different personalities. Both of these are correct. None of them are wrong. But find some friends. Find a minister or two. Don't spend all your time socializing, but find one or two that you socialize, you're friends with, and you can enjoy getting away from the pressure of pastoring.
the story was told, and it was told by one of our preachers, and under the circumstances, I believe it is exactly accurate. But he and his congregation were involved in a lawsuit, and the final verdict was given, and the lawyer that had represented them was kind of puzzled because they thought they had a better case than they had. And so the minister made this statement, said, I wonder if maybe the judge was bought off. And the lawyer, his attorney, turned to him and said, that man is a lawyer. And I am not prepared to believe that someone in my profession is willing to be bought off. It was a rather blanket statement, and it didn't say one way or the other about that individual situation. But I've thought about that so much because lawyers will defend each other. They have a little circle, they have a little fellowship, and I thought, now, we're talking about Christians. When I hear a rumor about my brother, a fellow minister, my first reaction is I should reject that and say I'm not prepared to believe that malicious gossip on my brother. Time may prove it to be true, but if so, let proof come and evidence be presented. But I don't want to take up in every rumor that I hear. In the sports world, the National Football League, the other professional sports, they have rules concerning contacting members of other teams. And if you tamper with a member of another team without going through the proper channels, there can be a serious fine and a forfeiting of games. Serious consequences follow the tampering. And I don't think that we need to get to the place that there be a rule in the United Pentecostal Church that if a pastor tampers with a neighboring church's congregation that he's fined $1 million. But you see, even the business world recognizes a certain amount of ethics and principles and things that are right. And I think that we in the church should be the first example of honesty and integrity and prefer our brethren over ourselves and actually take wrong on occasion to try to bring peace and harmony. There's maybe a couple of reasons that we should be willing to accept a transfer from a neighboring church. I have seen the time when within my own church there were two families that had a conflict and were uncomfortable worshiping in the same church together. One instance that I could think of is where a lady had been married and divorced before coming into the church, and now she was remarried and she had a family and was very happy at the church. In the course of time, her first husband had a conversion. And the next thing you know, we found that her first husband and his wife and their children were attending our church also. It made it very difficult for the children to say, well, that's my mother and that family, that's my daddy. Very difficult. And I went to the last family that had become a part of my church, and I told them that we were thrilled they were saved, but that they would not find our church to be the proper church home, and that here was an address of another church, and here was the name of the pastor, and let them know that I'd already communicated to that pastor and that we were asking that these people attend that church and that they be received warmly and graciously, but that would be their church home. And we followed through, and they did make the change. Sometimes we pastors have a personality that somehow, and I'm not a psychologist, I can't tell you all of the ins and outs of it, but I do know that we have our own unique personality, and there is on occasion someone who will come into our church that has a conflicting personality. We just don't enjoy dealing with them, and we could, easily recommend that they attend another church. We'd rather them go somewhere and be saved than just conflict with us and backslide and be lost. And so there are those times when a transfer is proper, but every transfer should be so transferred. Every member that's transferred should be done so that the pastors on both sides, after the case, can sit down, have lunch together, and laugh and talk and be friends. We're going to spend a long time together up there. We might as well learn to get along down here. Other than that, cutting away again the fog, there's no way that someone can quit my church without a very legitimate reason and then go to your church and be accepted, become a Sunday school teacher, become an officer in your church without it being a very personal slap to the church and the pastor that they have left. It will be a stinging insult. It will be a personal slap. And you say, well, people have the rights. We're not talking about whether they have the rights. We're talking about your neighbor and the personal hurt that he goes through. And you might as well accept this fact. I mean, it's a fact. When you take someone in of that nature, you cause a friction and a division. And if you're prepared to live with that, all right. Not only that, but when someone quits a church, that pastor loses some respect in the community of ministers because they begin to wonder, well, I wonder what he did. I wonder why he can't pastor those people. What's wrong with him? And you're contributing to the loss of respect that man must endure and suffer. And you do it. Make sure that when you receive those people, you're prepared for all that you're causing. I want to talk at length for a while about a fact that is somewhat different than we have heard taught heretofore. I grew up in the church, and I've heard it talked about the family, the church, the family. And certainly there is a bonding of emotions and love between the pastor, his wife, and the congregation. When they have dealt with sinners, they have prayed with them, seen them pray through, struggle for victory, overcoming temptations. Finally, they become victorious. They've seen struggles in the home, husband and wife, and their emotions have somehow been bonded to the emotions of their people. They've seen them grow up. They've performed their weddings. They've performed their children's dedications. And so there's a bonding. And there is an emotional tie. But we must recognize as preachers, we must recognize that the church is not our family. I have 2 sons. I have 2 daughters by marriage and 3 grandchildren and 1 wife. That is my immediate family. I have sisters, a brother, and my mother that remains. And that's an extension of my family. And when one of these members leaves, when they pass away, my family diminishes. I will not replace them. If one of my children would pass away, then I will suffer great hurt, and it will be a lifelong sorrow and grief that only the Comforter can compensate for. But in the church, it's more like a business. If you ran a grocery store and some customer comes in and says, I'm moving, well, we'll miss you. Where are you going? Hope you enjoy it. But in the back of our mind, we realize that another resident will fill the house where this customer has lived and will quite likely become our new customer. Thus, we have lost one and we gain one. The average American moves every 5 years. That means that in 5 years, every American will move once on average, which means you're going to have a church turnover. You might as well get ready for it. When people leave your church and you allow it to throw you in a state of depression and frustration, you weep and you cry, and you remind me of David. David's own son, Absalom, was a rebel. He had caused a revolution. And in his death, David wept. And he cried, oh, Absalom, Absalom, my son, would to God that I had died. And he wept and he mourned until finally Joab had all of it he could take. Now remember, this was his own flesh and blood son. But Joab came to him and says, David, you weep for your enemies, and you ignore your friends. Absalom was your enemy. He was his son, but he was his enemy. And we must mentally prepare, emotionally prepare for the times when, after we have done our best, we lose someone, and we must continue. We cannot go into a state of grieving that puts a cloud of darkness over our church, and it affects the worship and services, and we're depressed because all we'll do is lose more people, and then we get to go through more grieving and more sorrow. And besides all that, maybe after they're gone 6 months, they'll realize how tremendous a person, and they're apt to come back. Or in some instances, I'm afraid they may come back and be troublemakers again. So you just got to accept that this is somewhat like a business, and that the church will have changing membership. And given enough time, the congregation will completely replace itself. Everyone will have either moved or died. And there's nothing, including the pastor, and there's nothing we can do about it. So when you accept that, you become mature, your consideration of your responsibility, then you don't have all of those heartaches and griefs. Certainly it'll hurt. My wife and I have developed a little method that we use. When Bill Smith quits my church and goes away, maybe it is a good thing for him, maybe it's a good thing for us, maybe it's mutual. It really doesn't matter. The fact is He's gone. Now then, we come home from church Sunday morning, and we're sitting down to eat, and my wife says, "Boy, I miss Bill Smith this morning." But he's gone. All you're doing now is adding grief to grief. So we have a rule that when someone leaves, that for months we will not bring up their name. We will allow the emotions to die. We will allow the feelings to go away. We will be able to recover, see the church healed. And then maybe in 4, 5, 6 months, we can have developed the ability to talk about those people. And I don't mean gossip, slanders, but bring up their name without any hurt or pain, and we can have a good feeling. And that way my wife and I don't have to go through this tremendous trauma every time someone chooses to leave our church. Church members are temporary. They just are temporary. And we might as well accept that when someone quits your church. If you take it personal every time, you're going to be in a terrible pit. We all have failures. I've worked with people and didn't win them. I've had people and lost them. I've attempted things and it failed. And so over the period of time, each pastor, each preacher can have a storehouse of failures and frustrations. And on occasion, you can sit down and you can wallow in a pit of self-pity, saying, well, this didn't work and that didn't. I have actually gone through my address list on occasion, and I do it periodically, no set time schedule, but on occasion I'll go through my address book, and when I come across the name of someone who's moved, they're gone. They're gone. And quite likely they won't be back. They were military and they transferred. They were in college and they're gone. Their job transferred them. They bought a home where they're at. They're gone. Then I take and I mark their name out of my address book, so that every time I thumb through my address book, looking at hot prospects and new contacts, etc., that stabbing pain of a frustrated loss will not strike me again. I can recover. They can go ahead and live where they're at happily, live for God, be faithful in that church, loyal to their pastor, and I don't have to have that guilt feeling hanging over me. So what goes around comes around, I believe I've said, repeating what someone else has said. While they're in your church, use them. Don't abuse them. Don't abuse them, but use them. Utilize their talents, their skills, their offerings, all that they have. Utilize their being there. And maybe while they're there, even temporarily, they can be used of God to win another family or two that would be permanent. And you could be blessed forever because of their being there. And you can look forward to that. If I treat other ministers right, I will get along with them. They may treat me wrong, but if I don't retaliate, if I don't develop a critical, sarcastic spirit, if I don't, put them in their place, give them a piece of my mind, then I can be their friend, because I am not a threat to them. I am not some kind of a fear that they have to avoid. When you hear gossip on preachers, don't repeat it. Some preacher comes through your town. He's been traveling the country. He's an evangelist. Because of his traveling, he has been exposed to the latest rumors and many times true incidents that are tragic and sad. Develop patterns so that you avoid listening to all the malicious gossip that you can hear. Some of it true. If it's true, that won't benefit you. It could actually become a discouragement, because you can realize that others have failed. You never criticize a minister to his congregation, either individually, one-on-one at camp meeting, or from the pulpit in his church. You honor the minister. You honor the minister. I've observed for a few years very closely now, since we've been involved in LPA, the etiquette of the pulpit. And it kind of surprises me the few times that I have observed a visiting minister who had a desire to assist the local pastor in his church. Things that a visiting minister can say concerning the respect of the congregation for the minister. He can deal with the sacrifices and the burdens of the pastor, and it doesn't sound self-serving if it is a guest minister and it's not directed personally towards a local situation. But I've seen so many times that a visiting minister can help. Don't meddle, don't straighten up a church, but contribute to the respect of the congregation toward that pastor. That local pastor will hold you in close endearment if you can contribute to his leadership in that church. An interesting thing about us Pentecostals, we know how to worship.
We can get into a song service and we can sing a chorus 46 times and we can weep and worship and talk in tongues. Maybe if it's a fast chorus and the Spirit is moving that way, we can dance and run aisles and we can be exuberant in our worship. And all that's good. And we can pray with folks in the altar. And there's several things that we can do in prayer. Now, there are several types of prayer, and again, I'm not going to cover them all because there's so many able aids out there, books, tapes, etc. But there is one area that a training young minister needs to understand: prayer. And the Apostle Paul made reference to that in his letter to the Corinthian church, that there's a time when we should know how to pray in the understanding so that the people who listen can say amen to the prayer. We need to learn to pray a public prayer. Now, even a public prayer has two dimensions. The one, of course, is that we use good grammar and that we use good language and that the hearer respects our prayer. And they go away with, well, he prayed a good prayer. But more than that, we need to be able to pray a public prayer where we can take the minds of the hearers and we can collectively bring them into the presence of God. A good, effective preacher will know how to pray a public prayer. It's not a repentance prayer. God, we failed you. We're so short of our calling. No, that's a private prayer. It's not a prayer, God, we need healing, we need, which maybe is true, but a public prayer for a group is different than all that. It's a general prayer. Our Father, I mean, you're including everybody. We are so thankful for your blessings to us this day. And about the time you say that with a strong feeling of sincerity, someone in the congregation is going to say, yes, amen, as though they thought it themselves. They're not really listening to how beautiful your prayer is, but they're listening to the content of your prayer. And they are agreeing with the expression. So when you're thanking God for the beautiful weather we've had and for the health that you've given us and how our church has been blessed and how God has met our every need repeatedly again and again. And all across the building, minds are going to join with you. Yes, that's true. And I haven't thanked God for these blessings all day. And I have seen someone that can pray an effective public prayer, can take every mind in that building and link them together as a single mind. And they enter the presence and the glory of God. And I've seen people worship and break down and weep and praise God in His presence, all through an effective public prayer. And we are public people. We need to be able to pray public prayer. There are crisis times in a person's ministry. There are times when we become frustrated and we've exhausted all of our energy in pastoring the church or evangelizing, working for God, and we consider moving. There are three that happen to nearly all of us. There's several other that are kind of common, but there are three that we need to be aware of when you start preaching. You've made a commitment now. You've opted to forego a career. You're not going to be a lawyer, doctor, professor, or something of that nature. You've accepted the call to the ministry, and so you get into it, and there's enthusiasm and anxiety and excitement and dreams just unlimited. But after a period of 3 to 5 years, the honeymoon's over, and you realize that pastoring is seeing that the grass is mowed and turning on the PA system when someone goofed up and unlocking the door, and there's just some real mundane responsibilities that are the overwhelming part of pastoring a church. I think some 60 to 80% of a pastor's time is devoted to administration. And there's not many days that you're casting out devils or that you're seeing the sick healed, blind eyes open, and opening envelopes with millions of dollars pouring in for worthy causes. And somewhere during 3 to 5 years, you might as well get ready for a readjustment and a long-term commitment, a reevaluation, and a time when you just recognize that you're not going to be the person to pray at the opening of the U.S. Senate on a regular basis, and you're not going to be the president's personal minister, but you're going to pastor people that are nerds and folks that are slow learners and simple-minded folks. you're going to have folks get sick in your church service right there in the middle of service. And about the time you're making a real dramatic impact in a message, some fire engine's going by. And everybody's going to forget that you're even up there. And you're just going to have to settle in. And when it happens, don't be too disturbed. Don't let it shake you. Don't let it rock the boat, if you please, because it's happened to all of us. We've had to make serious commitments, and we've had to just, say, this is it. This is my life. I'm going to live a life of a servant to Jesus Christ. Then there's the midlife crisis, and just touch on it briefly because most of you young fellas getting into the ministry, it's a long time off. You can't realize that you will someday reach middle age, but you might even grow old, hopefully someday. But there's a midlife crisis. It happens to most people in every walk of life. For the preacher, it has some unique qualities about it because as you first get in the ministry, you begin to dream of that big church that you're going to pastor, that worldwide, if not at least a countrywide ministry, radio broadcast. You're going to be publishing publications and the profound information. You're going to be a missionary. You're going to speak several languages. A lot of the thoughts that when you're a child that are actually attainable, and I'm not belittling them, they're attainable, but you've settled down to the routine of pastoring a church, raising your family, paying the bills, keeping the grass mowed, trying to keep the leak out of the roof of the church, and trying to keep harmony with neighbors that don't like your racket, etc. And you've come to this point of midlife where you look back and you realize that, wait, I'm 40. I'll never be eligible to be the youth president. I missed that one. I thought, someday I would be. Well, I'm not going to be a missionary. I haven't learned another language. But it could be a real positive time when you redefine your goals and establish the priorities for the balance of your ministry. And then, of course, retirement's always there, and we believe God's going to provide for us, so we don't do much providing for ourselves. But you might as well realize one day you and Mom's going to grow old, and arthritis, rheumatism is going to set in, and you're going to not want to travel everywhere. It's interesting that you finally reach an age, and instead of looking forward to an invitation to preach a special service somewhere in another town, you turn down those invitations. You can stay home and do something important, play with your grandchildren or something of that nature. And you might as well deal with that. Do what you can as you can. Now, there's a time that, in my opinion, my humble opinion, that to take a day off and go fishing would be the biggest tonic that you could give you and your ministry. And to laugh and to put on those old khakis and tinnies and get out there and fish and poke your finger with a fishing hook, it'll refresh you and it'll give you a new enthusiasm. You'll come back to the church and your folks will recognize that you are indeed refreshed. Oh, hallelujah. Being a minister is many things. One of those has to do with emceeing a church service, putting together a church service. That's not hard because we've seen others do it and we just do what they do. Now, if they do it right, we're doing it right. If they're doing it wrong, we do it wrong. We do it like we know. We just fall into that rut. But let's examine the church service a little bit. And in this area, I would like to say that I have all the answers, and some of them are right, some of them are wrong, but I have the answers, and I'm opinionated. And I'll tell you my position. I had worked on this for quite a bit and put together some notes and an outline, and I had designed the perfect service. Shortly after that, I made a trip down into the South, and I was at a church on a Sunday night of a dear friend in a great church. I won't identify them, but I sat there on the platform and observed their procedure. It was fresh on my mind that I had come up with all the correct answers, the do's and the don'ts. And I watched them, and they didn't do anything right. I mean, they didn't do the way they were supposed to, according to my outline. And I noticed that they had a total different concept of what a church service should be like and how certain goals should be achieved. But the thing is, they had a tremendous church service. And to be realistic about it, I don't think that I could have made any suggestions, maybe one, and I won't tell you what it is, but other than that, they had achieved the goal of bringing their people to the house of the Lord to worship God in spirit and in truth. They had a time of spirited worship, and folks were edified, and their spirits were lifted, and the preaching of the Word. However, there are some general guidelines that you can follow that will help you. If nothing else, just the very fact that you've examined what maybe you shouldn't do or what you should do, and the priorities, the alternatives, and the options that are available. And so let's go over some of the things that we would advise in the area of emceeing a church service. The master of ceremony that sets the pace, and because of his able leadership, the things that need to be done are done. The pastor has the authority. Now, that doesn't mean that he should do everything. In fact, in the business, I am of the opinion that when the pastor leads the song service, he leads testimony praise, he makes the announcements, he receives the offering, he rebukes the kids who are chewing gum and getting up and in and out during service, and by the time he takes the pulpit to preach, a number of his congregation have already grown weary with hearing his voice, drone on and on all night. So we would suggest that you consider the possibility of having a song leader. Maybe even the person who opens the service will not be the pastor, but someone opens the service, someone leads songs. Someone else may even lead us a course or two. And then you have someone who has the list of announcements, and they make the announcements appropriately. There's prayer requests. There's an offering receipt. And then there's specials. And then we go into the preaching. Now, what's the best sequence for these things? And just how should they be arrived at? This tape is not complete. I think you go to tape 5.